Hey there, fellow knitters, fellow creatives, sister creatives. It's Lisa from Life with Fife from Creative Vermont. We're having some technical difficulties today, so just don't pay attention to the fact that I'm wearing completely different clothes and it's a different time of day from the second video that's part of this series or episode. But let me give you a little bit of an introduction if you are new to this podcast. We are, this is a podcast that talks about the connection between being a creative person, being connected to the creativity that is innate in all of us. It's not something that we have to awaken or discover. It's just there. It's part of who every human being is. So we are looking to connect with that creative part of ourselves. We use knitting primarily as knitting is for most of us, is the primary way that we activate or connect with that creativity. But what we also talk about here is how being connected to that part of ourselves helps us to be happier, more balanced, helps us to transcend the thinking mind from time to time for periods of time that gives us a greater sense of peace. And that knitting is, it is not a mindful practice. However, it does have mindful aspects of it. And so therefore we can use it in ways to create a more mindful way of being. And that this helps us to transcend or overcome or detach from thoughts of anxiety, thoughts of depression, and help us to be happier. And that by connecting with our creative self, we actually can bring that mindset into the rest of our lives, into our relationships with our friends, with our significant others, with our families, with our children, with our work colleagues. And that the calm that we can cultivate through our creativity and sanity that we can cultivate through our creativity, of course, is of benefit to us as human beings, trying to live good lives and trying to live lives that are meaningful and sound. And so that's what this podcast is about. We talk a lot about knitting here. In the summertime, I might take you into the garden. Right now, we're really working on our garden here in southern Vermont. And so that's what we are all about. So if this is something that you think that you'd like to be a part of, please do subscribe to this channel. It helps me to kind of create content that I think is going to be useful and helpful to you, and would love for you to be a part of our community here. So like the video, subscribe, and comment below. So today I'm really excited because we are doing a special episode on one of my all-time heroines, Elizabeth Zimmerman. Elizabeth Zimmerman was just an amazing person, and I think is actually a great leader for our times today. And I think that as creative people, we can look to those who've gone through challenges and lived through challenging times, and how they managed, and how did they remain sane, and how did they remain connected to that creative self. And so Elizabeth is an amazing example of that. She's one of the original knitters that brought knitting into a new realm. Before Elizabeth Zimmerman, almost all knitting was done flat by following patterns that were done in Vogue knitting. And if you didn't follow, and I mean, unless you were like a really expert knitter who could create and design, if you didn't follow patterns, you really were kind of screwed. Like you had no other way of creating knitting. And so most people, I think, knitted just to knit. Like if you were not interested in learning how to be a pattern serious knitter, you just kind of knit little pieces of, and there's lots of pictures of people from the 30s and 40s, women especially, sitting and just knitting. And there's one particular picture of Katharine Hepburn knitting, and I just wonder, was Katharine Hepburn a knitter? Like, I love Katharine Hepburn, but I doubt that she actually was like knitting something significant. I think she was just probably knitting, and I think that's what a lot of women did, which is great. If that's what you want to do, I think that's amazing. Just do whatever you want. But for many women who wanted to do more than that, there weren't many options. And so Elizabeth Zimmerman helped women to become empowered, to take ownership over their knitting, and to take ownership over their creative selves and their life as their artist life, right? That was something she gave women permission to do that. And it was, perhaps she was an artist herself. She married an artist. She was, and she was an entrepreneur. She started, a small business, which started as a small business selling yarn out of her home. And she wrote a monthly newsletter, which contained recipes as opposed to patterns. So anyone who purchased her yarn received these newsletters. And I really just want to say, I guess, at first, this is not sponsored by Schoolhouse Press, or I'm not receiving any compensation. I just personally love Elizabeth Zimmerman, and I think that she's an amazing person. But so to get back to what she did, she worked out of her home, doing the newsletters, selling her yarn, and giving her newsletter readers recipes for them to take ownership over their knitting. That was her primary theme, was this is your knitting, this is for you to take control of. And I'm going to get into 5 quotes that she has that are famous from, her famous quotes that really can, I think, help us today, that really give us not only guidance in our knitting, but guidance in our life. But I just want to first say that this book, I talk about this book a lot. This book was a game changer for me when I started knitting, when I started 20 years ago with young children, or maybe not 20 years ago, but like maybe 15 years ago when I started knitting seriously. This book was amazing, because when I looked on websites or when I looked at knitting magazines, I was just like, I cannot do patterns. Like, there's just no way that I'm going to be able to do this. But Opinionated Knitter is a collection of her newsletters, right? A collection of her newsletters. And so each month there is or each newsletter has a sweater, has some description of what you can make, and the book is also filled with pictures of her family, her beautiful family. Her daughter Meg Swanson still runs Schoolhouse Press. I just happened to purchase some things not too long ago, and I had an issue, and I called, and Meg actually got on the phone and helped me with my neckline. And Cully Swanson, Meg's son, has also helped me. It's just a wonderful, wonderful group of people, and family, and that they have this legacy of their mother's, that their mother was just this amazing woman. So these newsletters are so helpful. And as a new knitter, I devoured this book, and it gave me the confidence to try knitting, to try doing something, whereas the patterns were just paralyzing, and I felt like I needed to go to the yarn store and sit with someone and pay them to teach me how to do something. And there's nothing wrong with that too, if that's how you learn and that works for you. But for me, that wasn't really like, I felt like I couldn't get enough support sometimes. I just needed to have like a larger understanding of what I was doing. And Elizabeth gave that to me. And so even as I've been knitting for a long time, so I'm pretty good now. I still refer to this book to help me to understand the whole big picture of knitting, what I'm trying to do. So I highly recommend this book. No matter where you are in your knitting journey, this is such a great book. And she is such an entertaining writer. She's so witty and pithy, and these droplets of wisdom, which is what we're going to get to today in her. Okay, so we're going to get to the quotes in just a second. But as I like to do from time to time, is I like to read poetry. I love poetry. It's just going to be a short little poem. I like to do that because I think poetry has this ability to sort of center us immediately into truth. Poems tell a truth in a new way. And when we hear truth, it does something to us. It kind of resets our nervous system, right? It kind of like recalibrates things. And so I love poetry. I love Mary Oliver. I often read her poems. And I think this one is really relevant to Elizabeth Zimmerman and what it was about Elizabeth. And the name of this poem is called Mysteries, Yes. Truly, we live with mysteries too marvelous to be understood. How grass can be nourishing in the mouths of lambs. How rivers and stones are forever in allegiance with gravity, while we ourselves dream of rising. How two hands touch and the bonds will never be broken. How people come from delight or from the scars of damage to the comfort of a poem. Let me keep my distance always from those who think they have the answers. Let me keep company always with those who say, look, and laugh with astonishment and bow their heads. So the truth that I think is so kind of connected to Elizabeth Zimmerman is, let me keep my distance always from those who think they have the answers. And Elizabeth is teaching us through everything that she does to connect with our own hearts, to connect with what it is that we want to do in life. And who tells us in life to do what we want to do? Nobody does. But it's really at the heart of why we are creative people, right? Why we express our creativity is because we want to do something. We feel that pull inside of us. And what Elizabeth does is she allows us to be good knitters, even though we don't know. And even though the experts may have said something else, she gives us an alternative in order for us to get our juices flowing, to get our project going, and gives us the wherewithal to actually create something. And so it teaches us not to hold the words of others who tell us what they know. It teaches us to be the captain of our soul, right? The captain of our lives, that we can actually create what we want to do in the way that we want to do it. So hooray, Elizabeth, you're so amazing. And we need you today. So, all right, now let's just get right to the quotes. The first quote, properly practiced, knitting soothes the troubled spirit, and it doesn't hurt the untroubled spirit either. So this gets back to what we talk about all the time here, is that knitting is soothing. It's a soothing activity that helps to free us from our thoughts and from our endless desires, from the grasping mind that's never satisfied, from the negative thoughts that arise all the time that we just cannot stop, right? It brings us to a focused activity that gives us rhythm and soothing motion and gives us a product to look forward to, something at the end, right? That we get something. It's not just, where meditation, I love to meditate and I chant and I have my own practice. And there are benefits to that, but we don't touch those benefits. We see them later in our lives through the way we think and the way our life is. But that's not always easy to see in the beginning, right? Knitting gives us an immediate result. It keeps us going because we're in it for the product, right? But over time, we're spending a lot more time in this rhythmic state of mind where we are worrying less, we're obsessing less, we're thinking about ourselves less. And that helps with anxiety, depression, all of these things. So the second quote, knit on with confidence and hope through all crises, right? We come back to the knitting. We always return to our knitting. Not that knitting will solve our problems, not that we should just ignore our problems and knit, but we sometimes, let's face it, when we have a problem, most of our problems we think we're going to fix by talking about it to other people, by complaining to other people, by gossiping, by only creating more bad feeling, right? We're just creating more negativity by doing those activities. Knitting teaches us to step back, lean into ourselves, again, to rely on ourselves and hear our inner voice, to get into the rhythm of it. And it cultivates a sense of hope, because if we can create a sweater in the midst of a really difficult winter, what does that say about the possibilities in life? Number 3, I know that spinning sets me in a trance. It soothes me and charges my batteries at the same time. When times are tough, I sit down to spin during the news broadcasts with therapeutic results. So, how much more relevant could that be for today? And I would add, rather than sitting down during the news and spinning, I would say turn off the news and spin for a while. Disconnect from the world for just a little bit. Today, when she wrote this, the news was maybe 1 hour a day. Today we are bombarded with news and social media, and we are constantly being pulled in so many different directions and being shown so much information that it just contributes to this feeling of overwhelm and helplessness. And by turning it off and doing something productive, we are able to reset ourselves, reset our thinking, and really shifting the narrative that is our life. That was number 3. Number 4, no two people knit alike, look alike, think alike. Why should their projects be alike? Your sweater should be like your own favorite original recipes, like no one else's on earth. And that right there is just like she's giving us permission to make our own things and to do them in our style. And it doesn't have to look like anyone else's. It's like, be your own person. Okay, that's a really good message for life as a whole. Don't worry about fitting in with other people. Do what pleases you and what makes you happy. Don't be a bad person. Be a good person, the best person you can be, the kindest person you can be. However, listen to your own heart and do what it is that you find amazing. And she is encouraging us to do that by giving us the tools to create whatever we want. These books, these things that she wrote, enable us to make sweaters, to make garments, to make whatever garment you wish to make. You can learn to do it. And she empowers us to do that. So thank you, Elizabeth. And the last quote: really, all you need to become a good knitter are wool, needles, hands, and a slightly below average intelligence. Of course, superior intelligence such as yours and mine is an advantage. So here's an example of her wit, and she just, again, is just saying to all of us, like, you don't need to be an expert. You can just pick up your needles, your wool, and once you have the tools available to you, you can create something that is going to make you happy, make someone in your life happy, and connect you with that feeling of productivity, meaning, right? This is what this is about. It's about creating a life. We aren't knitting only to create garments. Knitting is creating a life. It is making a way of life. And imagine if we all felt that we had to wait to become an expert to do the things that we want to do. It's just the one thing in life that we can just kind of grab by the horns and do, and actually do in a good way, without having to wait for someone without having to have the skill set to read a pattern. She's teaching us how to do that. So she's giving us so much. So I'm so grateful to Elizabeth Zimmerman for all that she has done. And I just encourage you, please, go to the library, get an Elizabeth Zimmerman book, go online, check out Schoolhouse Press, look at her beautiful yarns. It's just, she's such a a balm for these times. And thank you so much for listening. Please remember to subscribe. Would love to have you as part of our community. I'm sending you amazing mojo for whatever knitting project you're doing, whatever creative project you're doing, and for a peaceful, happy, productive, and meaningful weekend and rest of life. See you soon.